I turned it down, Joe, and I regret it every damn day. Joe leans in, his eyebrows furrowing. Wait, what? What did you turn down? Clint Eastwood exhales slowly. The studio is silent, the air thick with anticipation. He looks straight ahead, but his eyes seem lost in time. I could have been Han Solo. Joe's eyes widen. No way. You're messing with me. Clint, are you telling me you were offered Han Solo? Clint nods. Yeah, George Lucas personally wanted me, and I said no. A heavy pause. Joe is stunned, almost speechless. Then he bursts out, Dude! Do you realize what you passed up? Clint chuckles bitterly. Oh, I do. Every damn day. But why did he turn it down? What was he thinking? And does he regret it more than anything else in his career? Joe leans back in his chair, shaking his head. Hold on, Clint. You've had one of the most legendary careers in Hollywood. What could possibly make you regret something? Clint exhales sharply, his fingers tapping lightly on the wooden table. The dim glow of the podcast studio casts deep shadows across his face, highlighting every line of experience etched into his skin. He doesn't respond right away. Instead, he leans forward slightly, locking eyes with Joe as if weighing the weight of his next words. You ever have one of those moments, Joe? A moment where you had a choice, one decision, one call, that could have changed everything? Joe nods, his curiosity intensifying. Yeah, of course. We all have those moments. Clint's lips tighten, his jaw clenching slightly. And what if you realized years later that you made the wrong call, that the choice you thought was smart at the time actually cost you something huge? The room is silent. Even Jamie, the producer, has stopped scrolling through his notes. The weight in Clint's voice demands attention. I got that call in 1977, Clint finally says, rubbing his chin. The kind of call that doesn't come twice. Joe squints. 1977, and wait a second. That's right when the biggest blockbuster of all time was being made. And then it hits him. His eyes widen. No way. Are you serious? Clint smirks, but there's no amusement in his expression, just the bitter taste of hindsight. Yeah, Joe, that was the year I turned down Star Wars. The room goes completely still. Even the faint hum of studio equipment feels deafening. Joe shakes his head in disbelief. You turned down Star Wars, Clint? Don't tell me. Clint interrupts, his voice steady but filled with a quiet regret. I was offered the role of Han Solo, and I walked away. Joe sits forward, running a hand through his hair. Han. Freaking. Solo. Clint, do you realize what you passed up? Clint exhales, nodding. I do now. But back then, it was just another script. Joe looks like he's about to explode. Dude, Star Wars wasn't just a movie. It changed Hollywood forever. Why would you say no? Clint leans back in his chair, folding his arms. Because I didn't get it, Joe. And I didn't take risks. The way he says it, low, almost self-deprecating, hangs in the air like a ghost. But why didn't he take the risk? And more importantly, how did he feel watching the movie become a global phenomenon without him? Joe leans forward, gripping the edge of the table. Clint, man, I gotta know, why? Why in the world would you say no to Star Wars? Clint sighs, rubbing his temple. His voice is calm, but there's an unmistakable weight behind it. Because, Joe, back then I was stubborn, maybe even arrogant. I had my own ideas about what kind of movies I should be making. Westerns, crime dramas, gritty, realistic films. That's what I knew. That's what I was good at. Joe nods slowly. So when Lucas came to you... Clint exhales sharply. He handed me the script, told me about this space adventure he was working on. Said he wanted me for this rogue smuggler, Han Solo. Joe whistles. Man, did you even read the script? Clint chuckles, shaking his head. I did, and I didn't get it, Joe. I mean, think about it. This was the 70s. Science fiction wasn't what it is today. It was a gamble. And when I read about the Force, a Wookiee co-pilot, robots talking to each other, I thought it sounded ridiculous. Joe's jaw drops. Dude, you thought Star Wars was gonna flop? Clint nods. Yeah, I did. And I wasn't the only one. Studios didn't believe in it. Even the actors thought it was gonna bomb. Nobody knew it would change the industry forever. Joe shakes his head. But Clint, you had George Lucas, a young, hungry filmmaker, offering you the lead role in what would become one of the biggest franchises of all time. There had to be something more to your decision. Clint leans forward, resting his arms on the table. His expression darkens slightly. There was a beat of silence. I was afraid. Joe's expression shifts from shock to curiosity. Afraid? Clint Eastwood? The man who played Dirty Harry was afraid of Star Wars? Clint nods, a bitter smile forming. Not the movie, Joe, the risk. See, I had just finished The Outlaw Josie Wales, a film I directed and starred in. It was a hit. My career was on fire. The idea of throwing all that away for a weird sci-fi flick, it didn't make sense to me. Joe whistles again. So you turned it down? Clint shrugs. Yeah, I told Lucas it's not my style. And that was it. He moved on. Joe shakes his head. And then? Clint exhales. And then I watched someone else step into that role. And I watched Star Wars become the biggest thing in Hollywood. Joe's eyes narrow. When did it hit you? When did you realize you made a mistake? Clint takes a deep breath, his fingers drumming against the table. Not right away. At first I just shrugged it off. Figured, good for them, but not my thing. But then the numbers came in. Box office records. Crowds lining up around the block. People watching it 10, 20 times, and that's when it hit me. Joe leans in. Hit you how? Clint's voice drops slightly. I turned down the biggest role of my career, and I didn't even know it. A long pause. The air in the studio feels heavier. Joe exhales sharply. Man, that's gotta sting. Clint nods slowly. It did, and it only got worse. Joe frowns. Worse? How? Clint leans forward, locking eyes with Joe. Because that wasn't the only time I did it. Joe's eyebrows shoot up. Wait, there's more. Clint smirks, but there's no humor in his expression. Oh yeah, and this next one might be even worse. Joe runs his hands down his face, shaking his head. All right, Clint, you've already blown my mind with this Han Solo thing. But now you're telling me you did it again? Clint nods, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the wooden table. His eyes, sharp as ever, seem distant, as if he's staring at a version of himself from decades ago. Yeah, Joe, and this one hurts just as much. Joe leans in. What was it? Clint exhales slowly. Well, let me ask you something. What's the greatest action movie of all time? Joe doesn't even hesitate. Easy. Die Hard. Clint smirks, but there's a sadness in his eyes. Bingo. Joe's jaw drops. No. Clint, don't tell me. Clint cuts him off, nodding. Bruce Willis wasn't the first choice for John McClane. Joe practically jumps out of his chair. Dude, you could have been John McClane. Clint leans back, letting out a low chuckle. They came to me first, Joe. The script was sitting on my desk, and I said no. Joe groans. Clint, man, what were you thinking? Clint shrugs. Same thing I was thinking when I turned down Star Wars. At the time, it sounded like another generic action flick. A cop trapped in a building, fighting terrorists. It felt small to me, like a B-movie. And I didn't do B-movies, Joe. Joe shakes his head in disbelief. Man, that is insane. Die Hard wasn't just an action movie. It changed the whole damn genre. Clint nods. Yeah, and I didn't see it coming. Again. Joe exhales, still trying to wrap his head around it. So wait, after you turned it down, who'd they go to next? Clint smirks. Frank Sinatra. Joe's head snaps up. Frank Sinatra? The Frank Sinatra? Clint nods. Yep, see, Die Hard was actually based on a book called Nothing Lasts Forever, which was a sequel to a movie Sinatra had starred in back in the 60s. Contractually, they had to offer it to him first, but he was in his 70s by then, so obviously, he passed. Then they came to me. Joe just stares at him, processing this absurd reality. And then you passed, and they went to Bruce Willis. Clint exhales, nodding. That's right. And Bruce, he owned that role, made history with it. Joe leans back, hands on his head. Clint, this is unreal. You turned down two of the most iconic roles in Hollywood history. Do you ever think about what could have been? Clint's expression hardens slightly. He doesn't answer right away. Then, after a long pause, he mutters, All the time, Joe. More than you'd think. Joe is about to speak again when Clint raises a hand, stopping him. His eyes darken slightly. And here's the real kicker, Joe. Joe blinks. What? Clint leans forward, his voice lower now, carrying the weight of a final confession. It wasn't just those two. Joe's eyes widen. Wait, you're telling me there's a third one? Clint nods, his fingers steepling. And this one? This one might hurt the most. Joe leans forward, gripping the edge of the table as if steadying himself. All right, Clint, you've already passed on Han Solo and John McClane, and now you're telling me there's a third role? Another massive, career-defining role that you walked away from? Clint nods slowly. His face is calm, but there's something in his eyes, a shadow of regret that's been buried for years. Yeah, Joe. And this one? This one still haunts me. Joe gestures wildly. Man, just tell me, what was it? Clint exhales, rubbing his hands together. The room is silent, everyone holding their breath. Then finally he says it. James Bond. Joe freezes. His mouth drops open, but no words come out. Even Jamie, the producer, lets out an audible, "No fucking way." Joe blinks. James. Freakin'. Bond. Clint nods. After Sean Connery left, the producers were looking for a new Bond. Someone with grit. Someone who could redefine the role. And they came to me. Joe looks like he might fall out of his chair. So wait, they were actually considering an American Bond? Clint sighs. Not exactly. They were open to the idea, but I was their wild card pick. They wanted to shake things up. They thought my tough, no-nonsense style could bring a new energy to the character. Joe shakes his head in disbelief. Holy so, why didn't you do it? Clint leans back, rubbing his face. Same damn reason as before, Joe. I thought Bond should be British. I told them, this isn't my role. It belongs to someone from the UK. Joe groans. Dude, come on. You turned down freaking Bond because you thought it wasn't your place? Clint nods. I thought I was making the right call. I thought I was respecting the character, the legacy. But looking back, I wonder. Joe throws his hands up. Dude, Bond is one of the biggest franchises in the world. Do you realize what you passed up? Clint exhales, his eyes narrowing slightly. Yeah, Joe, I do now, but at the time it didn't seem right. I was doing my own thing. Directing, starring in my own movies. I didn't think I needed Bond. Joe shakes his head. And then they gave it to Roger Moore. Clint nods. Yep, and Roger killed it. He turned Bond into a global phenomenon. The movies made billions. And me? I kept making the films I was comfortable with. Joe leans forward, eyes locked on Clint. Man, this is insane. You turned down Han Solo, John McClane, and James Bond. That's 3 of the most legendary roles in cinema history. Clint shrugs, but there's a tightness in his jaw. That's right. Joe exhales sharply. Damn, Clint. If you could go back, would you do it differently? Clint is silent for a long moment. The weight of decades of choices, missed opportunities, and what-ifs seem to press down on him. Then finally, he speaks. Joe, I've had an incredible career. I've done things I'm proud of. But yeah, if I could go back, I'd take at least one of those roles, just to see how different things might have been. Joe nods, letting the words settle. Clint lets out a dry chuckle. But hey, maybe in some alternate universe I'm flying the Millennium Falcon, crawling through air vents and ordering a martini, shaken, not stirred. Joe laughs, shaking his head. Man, that is a universe I'd love to see. Clint smirks. Me too, Joe. Me too. Joe shakes his head, still in disbelief. Clint, I gotta be honest, this is insane. 3 of the biggest roles in movie history. Han Solo, John McClane, James Bond, and you turned down all of them. Clint nods, his expression unreadable. That's right. Joe exhales sharply. Man, I can't even imagine what your life would have been like if you had said yes to even one of them. Do you ever think about that? About how different things could have been? Clint leans back in his chair, silent for a moment. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, soften slightly. There's a flicker of something. Regret? Curiosity? Maybe both. All the time, Joe. More than I'd like to admit. Joe sits up straighter. So, if you could go back, if you had a second chance, would you take one of those roles? Clint chuckles, but there's no humor in it. He tilts his head slightly, as if weighing his own words. You know, Joe, I've had a hell of a career. I've made movies that I'm proud of. I did things my way. and I don't regret much." He pauses, tapping his fingers against the table. "But if I could do it all over again? Yeah, I think I'd take at least one of those roles. Just to see what might have been." Joe nods slowly. "Damn, that's heavy, man." Clint exhales, shaking his head with a small smile. "But hey, I can't complain. I got to be Dirty Harry. I got to make the movies I wanted to make. Not many people in Hollywood get to say that." Joe grins. "Yeah, that's true. You still made history, just in your own way." Clint smirks. "Exactly. But still, every once in a while I catch Star Wars on TV. Or I see a Die Hard clip. Or someone orders a martini. Shaken, not stirred. And I wonder—" Joe raises an eyebrow. "Wonder what?" Clint's voice drops just slightly. "What if?" A long pause. The room is silent except for the soft hum of the studio equipment. The weight of those two words hangs in the air. Joe exhales, shaking his head. "Damn, Clint, that's deep." Clint grins. "Yeah, well, that's life." Joe leans into the mic, addressing the audience. "All right, guys, you've heard it from the man himself. Clint Eastwood, one of the greatest actors of all time, with 3 of the biggest what-ifs in Hollywood history. But here's the question. If you were Clint, which role would you have taken? Han Solo, John McClane, or James Bond? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. If you were Clint, which role would you have taken? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.